This is the chilling case of Amanda Reid, a devoted wife, a respected schoolteacher, and a woman hiding a secret so dangerous, she was willing to do anything to protect it. Her husband, Daniel, thought he knew her better than anyone, but the truth buried in their basement would shatter his world and end hers. Before we dive deep into this twisted story of betrayal, blackmail, and disappearance, make sure you support the channel by subscribing and staying active. Your engagement helps us bring you more gripping true crime documentaries just like this one. Now, let's begin. Amanda Reid's life looked like the kind you'd see in a glossy magazine about small-town perfection. Her two-story White House set at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, framed by a neat garden and a swing set for the children she and her husband, Daniel, always said they might have someday. She worked as a respected schoolteacher, known for her patience and kindness. Every morning, she left for work with her hair neatly tied, her lesson plans in hand, and a warm smile for neighbors walking their dogs. On Sundays, she baked pies for church fundraisers. Her life appeared spotless, without a crack in the picture-perfect frame. But Amanda had learned a long time ago how easy it was to hide something ugly behind a beautiful image. It wasn't guilt that kept her awake at night, it was fear. 2 years earlier, she had made a choice. One she told herself was harmless at the time. It had started as a distraction, a way to feel alive again during a dull and quiet stretch in her marriage. Daniel was devoted but predictable. Amanda craved something unpredictable, and for a few stolen weekends, she found it in the arms of another man. She convinced herself it was temporary, a fling that would vanish without a trace once she came to her senses. And eventually, she did end it, cutting off all contact and burying the memory deep. The problem with secrets, Amanda knew, was that they didn't stay buried. They had a way of clawing their way back to the surface, especially when someone else had a reason to dig them up. She had no idea who knew, no idea how much they knew, but lately, she felt it everywhere in the way she caught glimpses of the same car in her rearview mirror on different days, in the faint sense of being watched when she locked her classroom door after work. At first, she told herself she was imagining it, but imagination doesn't leave your heart racing in the middle of the night. Her life had become a balancing act. She played the role of the perfect wife, careful never to let Daniel sense her unease. She smiled during dinner, asked about his day, and laughed at his jokes. All the while, her mind kept running through worst-case scenarios. What if he found out? What if her job found out? She thought about the small-town gossip, the judgmental whispers, the headlines that could ruin her. She thought about losing the only stability she had left. And each time, she came to the same cold conclusion: if her secret ever saw the light of day, she would do anything to protect herself. Anything. Even if it meant crossing a line she could never return from. It was a Tuesday evening when the first envelope arrived. The day had been ordinary, almost forgettable rain tapping gently on the windows, the streets slick and glistening under the glow of street lamps. Amanda had come home from work tired, her clothes damp from the walk from her car to the front door. She noticed the envelope sticking out of the mailbox, pale against the dark metal. No stamp, no return address, just her name, in thick black ink that bled slightly from the moisture in the air. She didn't think much of it until she stepped inside, peeled off her coat, and slid a finger under the flap. Inside was a single photograph, and when she saw what it showed, her heart seemed to stop. It was her, standing in the dim light of a hotel parking lot. Her coat was unbuttoned, revealing the dress she had worn that night 2 years ago. Beside Her was a man, tall, dark-haired, his hand brushing against hers. The image was grainy but unmistakable. She remembered the night instantly, down to the cheap perfume in the air and the weight of guilt pressing against her ribs. She had told Daniel she was visiting her sister. That was the lie that had covered this moment. Her hands trembled as she flipped the photo over. The back was blank. No note, no threat, just the proof. The message was in what wasn't written. Someone knew, and they wanted her to understand that they knew. She told herself maybe it was just an old image someone stumbled upon, but the timing felt deliberate. This was no accident. The next morning, she found another envelope waiting in the mailbox. This time, contained a bank deposit slip. The amount was significant. Thousands of dollars deposited into her account the day before. She had not made the deposit, nor had Daniel. The slip was crisp, folded neatly, as if whoever placed it there wanted her to think about it, to connect it to the photograph. A silent signal. I can put things in your life just as easily as I can take them away. Amanda's mind ran wild with possibilities. Was this blackmail? Was it some elaborate setup? Was the money a bribe to keep her quiet about something she didn't even understand yet? She realized with growing dread that the person behind this wasn't just watching. They were inside her life, moving pieces, without her permission. And the most terrifying part was the certainty that this was only the beginning. The envelopes weren't warnings. They were moves in a game she hadn't agreed to play. But now she was in it, and there was no way to step out without risking everything. Amanda couldn't stop thinking about the man at the grocery store. It had seemed like such an ordinary encounter at the time, just a stranger with a confused look, asking if she knew where Brookfield Street was. She'd frowned and told him she'd never heard of it, but something about the exchange had stayed with her. His eyes had lingered on her face too long. His smile had been polite, but not warm. And when he left, she had the strange feeling he knew far more about her than she knew about him. In the days after the second envelope arrived, she began to notice him again, or maybe she was only noticing the patterns now. He was never close enough to speak to her, but she saw him near places. She went a few rows over at the farmer's market, leaning against a lamppost outside the library, sitting in a car at the edge of the school parking lot. Every time, he looked away quickly. When she noticed, it was enough to keep her on edge. Her mind always split between living her daily life and scanning for his presence. One afternoon, she saw him walking out of a hardware store while she sat at a red light. Without thinking, she turned her car and began following him at a distance. He walked quickly, weaving through side streets until he reached an old, abandoned warehouse on the far side of town. The building was half hidden behind overgrown trees and rusted fencing, the kind of place kids dared each other to go near. He slipped inside through a side door, vanishing into the shadows. Amanda sat in her car, her pulse hammering. She told herself she should leave, but she didn't. She waited. After what felt like hours, he emerged, looked both ways, and walked off in the opposite direction. She stayed until she was sure he wouldn't double back, then got out and approached the building. The smell of dust and rot clung to the air, and the inside was silent except for the occasional drip of water from a cracked pipe. She saw nothing obvious, no signs of her photographs, no clues, but the place felt wrong, like it had been used recently for something it shouldn't have been. The next morning, the man's photograph was on the local news. He had been reported missing. Police had found his car abandoned near the river, keys still inside. There was no sign of a struggle, no explanation. Amanda's stomach twisted as she realized she had been the last person to see him alive. She thought about calling the police, about telling them what she knew, but deep down, she was glad she didn't. Because a small, dangerous thought had already begun to take root. Maybe his disappearance was the end of her problem. For a few weeks, Amanda allowed herself to believe that the danger had passed. The man was gone, the envelopes had stopped, and her life began to slide back into its old rhythm. She no longer felt the weight of unseen eyes following her every move. She told herself the missing man had been the source of it all, that whatever he wanted had died with his disappearance. But underneath that fragile sense of calm was a tension that never fully loosened, a constant flicker of doubt she tried to ignore. That illusion shattered one gray afternoon when she opened her mailbox and found another envelope. Her hands froze before she even touched it. The paper was the same heavy stock as before, the writing the same thick black ink. She carried it inside, placed it on the kitchen counter, and stared at it for several minutes before sliding a knife under the seal. Inside were 3 photographs, each more damning than the last. The first showed her leaving the warehouse where she had followed the man. The image was taken from across the street, from a distance that suggested the photographer had been waiting for her to emerge. The second showed her tossing a black trash bag into the dumpster behind the school late at night. She recognized the moment instantly. It had been after hours, long after the janitor had gone home. The third made her chest tighten. It was taken at the riverbank, at the very spot where the man's car had been found. She was standing with her hands in her coat pockets, looking out over the water. The meaning was clear. Someone had been watching her movements with the same precision she had been watching the man. They hadn't just stumbled upon her, this was deliberate. The second presence had been close enough to document her in moments she thought were private, moments she hadn't even realized were significant until now. The timing was no coincidence. Amanda realized with a growing dread that whoever was behind this had more control than she had imagined. They didn't just know about her past affair, they knew about the envelopes, the man, the warehouse, and the river. They knew where she had been and what she had done, and they were letting her know they could connect her to a disappearance without ever having to speak a word. She sat at her kitchen table for hours, the photos spread out in front of her, her thoughts spiraling. This wasn't over. The man's disappearance hadn't ended her problem, it had only removed one player from the game. Someone else was still out there. And now, they held a new kind of power over her. This wasn't just about her secret anymore. It was about survival. The morning all came undone began like any other. Daniel left for work early, the sound of his car fading down the street, while Amanda stood at the window with her coffee. The sky was pale and cold, the kind of winter light that made the world seem still and brittle. She had barely slept. The latest photographs were still in her mind, heavy and inescapable. She had hidden them with everything else in the locked trunk she kept in the far corner of the basement, buried behind boxes of old clothes and broken furniture. It was the one place in the house Daniel never touched. After finishing her coffee, she decided to look through the contents again. It was a compulsion she didn't fully understand. Part of her wanted to destroy it all, but another part clung to the items as if they were pieces of armor. The trunk creaked when she opened it, releasing the faint smell of old paper and dust. Inside were the letters from her former lover, folded and worn at the edges. There was a thick envelope of cash taken slowly over months from the school's fundraising accounts, money she had convinced herself she would pay back someday. And there were the photographs, the first one she had received, the others that followed, each one a reminder of how deeply she was trapped. She sat on the basement floor, running her fingers over the items, trying to decide what her next move should be. The walls seemed to close in around her. She was so focused on the contents of the trunk that she didn't hear the faint creak of the door at the top of the basement stairs. She didn't hear the footsteps until they were halfway down. Daniel's voice didn't break the silence. He didn't say a word. She looked up to see him standing there, his eyes locked on the open trunk, his expression unreadable. In that moment, Amanda realized there was no way to explain what he was seeing. The affair could be forgiven, maybe. Even the cash could be rationalized. But all of it together, every lie, every theft, every secret, it formed a picture too complete to undo. Daniel stepped closer, his gaze still fixed on the evidence of a life he never knew his wife was living. Without asking questions, without raising his voice, he pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed. Amanda didn't need to hear the words to know who he was calling. The sound of his voice speaking to the police was distant, almost muffled by the pounding in her ears. She had spent years building walls around her secret, willing to do anything to keep it hidden. But in the end, it wasn't a stranger who destroyed her, it was the man she had thought would never turn against her. The man who, until that morning, believed he knew exactly who she was.